Ghost of Tsushima is a glorious, gorgeous, fantastic example of quality and single-player narratives within open-world games. It has it all: beautiful graphics, an incredible art style, an excellent cast of characters, engaging gameplay, and an awesome main story with an open world full of activities to entertain yourself with. This game is simply brilliant. I cannot recommend it enough, and for once I find myself excited to do a review, which I honestly don't feel often. Before we get too deep into it though, the whole point of that summary is a recommendation. From here on out, footage may get spoilery and I may use spoilers to elaborate my points, so I'd like to issue a hefty spoiler warning, just in case, so we're all on the same page. Do I recommend this game? Yes. Buy it, play it, come back and watch the rest of this review for the sake of entertainment, and we're all dandy. Anyway, now that spoiler warning is out of the way, let's get into my review of Ghost of Tsushima. I love Ghost of Tsushima. I thoroughly enjoyed playing it, and it achieved what I wanted it to. It was a fun game with adequate challenge and a compelling narrative set in a gorgeous open world, which realised my imagination of the samurai fantasy. Not that I know much about the samurai historically speaking, but to put it quite simply, this was my perception. Before we get too deep, a huge thanks to Sony for sending me this Ghost of Tsushima branded sake, which is a really neat bit of PR in my opinion. I won't drink it because it's brewed in Peckham, but I appreciate it. But moving on to actually talking about the game, we play as Samurai Jin Sakai, the survivor of a devastating losing battle against the invading Mongol Empire, which is led by Khotan Khan, or as I like to call him, the terrifying corpulent bastard, grandson of Genghis Khan. This guy didn't exist in real history, however I guess they thought Genghis Khan has so many grandsons that nobody would notice. The story of Ghost of Tsushima is based on the Mongol invasion of Japan in 1274 led by Kublai Khan, and these portraits are genuinely terrifying, but nowhere near as terrifying as my pronunciation. I made the joke so you won't have to. Jin Sakai as a protagonist is fun and compelling. You feel his struggle and you get invested in his story. He starts off as a samurai, honourable and proud. Jin slowly realises that there's more to life and more to war than the samurai way. And in order to overcome the Khan and the Mongol threat to his home, he needs to become more himself. And the story is him developing himself to let go of his honour and do the right thing for the people. Being an honour-bound samurai that faces his enemies head-on is all well and good, but in reality, that casually sacrifices the lives of many innocents. This personal conflict is told beautifully, and you really get a vibe for Jin as a character. We see his tactics develop over the course of the game to be less influenced by his upbringing and more effective against his foes. We see a development of character quickly form in Jin as well. He's not necessarily charismatic or particularly humorous, but what he is wise. He's also loyal to his people and his allies, and can often be seen, especially in side character arcs, as something of a moral compass. We get to see both sides of Jin as a character. We get to see his human side, and then we get to see his developing terrifying ghost persona as well. Other characters in this story look up to Jin as an example. He's a leader character in truth. He leads these people in this resistance against the Mongols outside of the restrictive way of the samurai. That's not necessarily how he is at the start, but he develops into that. The story hinges on the moral development of Jin. It goes from honourable to realistic. The Mongols don't have any honour, so fighting them with honour is completely redundant. A lone samurai could never take on the invading Mongol army, which leads Jin to becoming the Ghost, a terrifying stealth warrior who isn't restricted by the honour guidelines set by his samurai background. He can go anywhere, defeat anyone, and that development, even when simplified, is just cool. Meanwhile, the samurai frown upon the Ghost's tactics, believing them to be without honour. But I think the entire point is, though honour is all well and good for the lords, which is how the game sets up the people's perception of the samurai, constantly reminding you that you are Lord Sakai, the little people tend to get a bit lost in that code. The Ghost stands to protect every last person on Tsushima from the Mongols, using any tactic possible that may not be honourable by the standards of a samurai, but upholding samurai standards to the Mongols, who we see disregard those standards as their very first move in the plot, is suicide for one, and also doesn't actually protect anyone. And so a huge moral in this story is that what the fuck even is honor and who is it for? And from a pragmatic standpoint, I can respect that. Jin also has pre-established relationships with certain characters such as Lord Shimura, who is the Lord of Tsushima who took Jin in after his father was killed when he was quite young. Jin cares deeply for this character and vice versa. However, the difference of opinion on the methods of the Ghost eventually wind up driving these two characters apart, turning Lord Shimura into essentially an anti-villain. This entire relationship symbolizes the Ghost breaking away from the way of the samurai. Jin has some history with characters like Lady Masako and Sensei Ishikawa to the point where you feel like they've met before, but we don't get much depth beyond that there. Both these characters also reflect different things in Jin. Ishikawa's dedication to the bow coupled with his story arc, at least in my perception, symbolizes over-dedication and hubris, can lead to closed-minded zeal, can only have a negative effect, which is a lesson that sticks with Jin, I find, in his story. Masako, on the other hand, is a symbol of loss, and how the desire for vengeance can consume somebody, which is another lesson that Jin takes to heart to help establish a line as to where too far actually becomes too far. And then you've got Jin's childhood friend Ryuzo, whose name I just probably pronounced horribly wrong, I apologise. Their relationship is established is currently quite strained. Ryuzo is now the leader of the Straw Hat Ronin, and is desperately trying to find a way to feed his men, a venture in which Jin unsuccessfully attempts to help. This leads to Ryuzo eventually betraying Jin, and essentially symbolises Jin's own desperation and how careful he needs to be in going about addressing that in order to avoid playing straight into the hand of the Khan. And also reminds you of the overall dire situation that the entirety of Tsushima is suffering from in light of the Mongol invasion. Then pretty far into the story we're reunited with Jin's childhood nanny, who we see at first in a flashback very briefly to the point where you think this is a character we'll never see again. However, when the story takes us back to Jin's clan home, which he hasn't visited since he left 15 years prior, we meet her again, where we discover she's getting on a bit, and she has a character arc where we learn more about Jin as a child and his father, leading to Yuriko eventually passing away, but the game gives closure to that part of both Jin's story and this random character, who could have so easily been dismissed. And though it's a minuscule character arc, especially when compared to the others, it's probably one of my favourite in the game, because it is the best example of this game not skipping over characters. And it also serves as a final confirmation that the Ghost path is in fact righteous considering the circumstances. As well as the characters known to Jin, there are also characters that Jin meets along his journey over the course of the game. Firstly, you have Yuna, a thief who saved Jin's life and helped him realise the honourable way that he's used to at the start of the story isn't really realistic, and is probably one of Jin's most important allies. And so she's there to sort of emphasise that there's value in the people, and that there are strong alliances to be made outside of the samurai. Yuna is also responsible for the Ghost becoming a local legend, if you will. She knows what the people need, so she helps craft Jin into exactly what that is, making her a very important character in the protagonist development of this story. We also have Yuna's brother Taka, who is a blacksmith, who we rescue early on in the story. He crafts us some bits and pieces, and it becomes very clear very quickly that he admires the Ghost. And over the course of the story, he becomes braver and more willing to help Jin directly, which symbolises the effect that the Ghost is having on the people of Tsushima, and the positive of that influence along with the negatives. Then we've got Kenji, who's a bit of an odd guy with a funny voice who is always up to some scheme. A classic funny shady character who is technically on your side but keeps fucking up, so you keep him around because of his demeanour, which disguises his obvious admiration for and loyalty to Jin. I honestly couldn't tell you what this character is intended to represent in this overall narrative, but he's a blast of a character to chill with, and he becomes a useful ally in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And then we have Norio, who is a warrior monk. For the most part, Norio seems to be torn between protecting his faith and protecting the people. Desperate to live up to his brother's example, who saved Cedar Temple but was killed when it was taken by the Mongols. Or at least that's what everyone was led to believe. However, upon discovering his brother's true fate, Norio flies off the handle by quite a fair bit and massacres an entire camp full of Mongols. This is just as much a lesson to Jin as the Ghost as it is a representation of Jin's character. There is a line that you don't cross. No matter how much rage you feel, some things are just simply not worth the toll they'll take on you. It also reminds you that even if the Ghost is justified, there will be a price to pay for Jin's actions. Whether that be personal or otherwise, what he does changes him forever. These allies have story arcs that trail off from the main story into the side stories. You follow them through to a certain extent as a part of the story and then continue them as side content, by which point you're already invested and choose to do so. This feels right when you continue the main story, as these characters that surround you are the stories in themselves. They feel relevant to the main story, not directly so much by the end, but when it comes to the bond between Jin and them, absolutely. I can't imagine this story playing out naturally without doing the side character arcs. The story's main antagonist is, of course, Cotton Khan. Ruthless and fiercely intelligent, Cotton Khan prepared to invade Tsushima by learning the language, the customs, and the traditions. He knows the beliefs of the samurai and uses that against them. He's a tactical genius who really knows how to get under his enemy's skin. But what's most terrifying about this character is, despite his capacity for incredible cruelty, he never undervalues the tactical advantages gained through mercy. He breaks the samurai down, which makes him a massively compelling antagonist in a story about breaking away from those traditions. He's a great obstacle that the samurai can't overcome, but the ghost can. The narrative is divided into 3 acts, each taking you to a different part of Tsushima. This is clever as the story doesn't go back on itself and it doesn't take you back to where you've already been necessarily too much, which helps keep the open world fresh and interesting even when in the later stages of the game. This prevents overwhelming you with everything the open world has to offer at once, which helps keep players from losing too much focus on the story. Sure, you can go off and do side content, but you'll probably mostly be doing that side content in the area relevant to what's currently going on in the narrative. The narrative of this game is terrific. I like the characters, I was invested in this story, and it felt satisfying come the end. I think the story was a beautiful tale of Jin freeing himself of the restrictions of the samurai in order to protect his people. Realising that the honourable way of the samurai may be a fit code for the lords, but the innocent suffer as a result, and the game portrays that excellently. Now, I do feel like it was let down a bit by certain cutscenes. Most of the time the cutscenes in the story were fine, but at certain moments it would be an awkward stand around and talk semi-cutscene that's dressed like a cutscene, but it's actually not, with the characters standing around awkwardly making random hand gesture movements, which I guess are there to make it seem more natural, but have the complete opposite effect to make it seem contrived. Now, this isn't placed instead of proper cutscenes in a lot of places, and are certainly more common in the side content than the main content, which is acceptable, but any drama those cutscenes are intended to have is pretty quickly lost, but the game does make up for it with some awesome shots. However, on the whole, the story truly is an incredible, beautifully told tale. I don't think there's much hope for me doing the narrative all the justice that it deserves in a video with a realistically watchable runtime, so we're going to move on to talk about where this game truly thrives. The combat. Sorry for the out of place montage there, but this game excels in combat. Most action games either have combat that doesn't look particularly pretty but is super fun to play, or combat that looks great and is simply tedious to control. The balance is super refreshing in Ghost of Tsushima. Wait, did I just kill that samurai? I am happy with both how the combat looks and how it plays. It's smooth, elegant and responsive, barring a few tracking issues on some enemy AI attacks that really throw me off, but I'll get into those in a moment. Enemies attack in several ways. Sometimes they'll unleash a chain of light attacks that you can block, or if you're fast enough, parry, sometimes allowing for a perfect parry which will open your opponent up to a massive counter attack, often on weaker enemies resulting in an instant kill. Sometimes they'll issue a heavy attack highlighted by a red flash which you cannot block or parry, so you must dodge it. If you dodge it in the correct direction, you'll be able to land a few attacks on your foe. Sometimes your enemies will go for an unblockable attack which is highlighted by a blue flash. These unblockable attacks can sometimes be dodged, though certain enemies have a weird tracking thing going on, and no matter where you go they might hit you anyway, but you can also parry these attacks. But the game's combat focuses on patience and anticipation, so you've got to learn your enemy's fighting pattern before you can actually hope to be effective. Some enemies use tools such as bombs which you have to avoid, and you can also find yourself facing enemy archers which you need to dodge the arrows of, though later in the game you get a perk that allows you to block them with your sword. In combat you have 4 key stances, each using different power attacks that are effective against different enemy archetypes. Stone stance focuses on strong two-handed strikes that are super useful against sword-wielding foes, which is the default stance you get from the very beginning. Water stance focuses on swifter one-handed strikes that are useful against enemies that have shields. Wind stance focuses primarily on strikes effective against enemies wielding spears, and moon stance are attacks that allow you to keep some distance from your opponent, which makes them ideal when facing brute class enemies. You unlock these stances as you observe and kill more Mongol leaders. Don't ask me what the correlation is there, I don't understand it myself. Then you have the ghost stance, which you unlock as you progress through the story. In order to use it, you need to build up enemy kills without sustaining any damage from their attacks. Once your ghost meter is ready, you can unleash the ghost stance and one-hit kill 3 enemies in quick succession. And to put it simply, it's fucking awesome. And also has a good chance of terrifying the enemies that you can't kill with it. These stances don't necessarily dictate how you play the game or how you fight foes, as you can use any stance on any enemy really, so if you're facing different enemy archetypes at the same time, instead of wildly having to switch through the stances, you can choose the stance most effective on the trickiest foe and still come out victorious. You also face all the different enemy classes before you unlock the stances that dispatch them swifter. The stances are easy to access and switch between, so using them is recommended. It'll make your life easier and provide a simple aesthetic variety in combat as well. To realise the samurai fantasy, you have standoffs where you face down your enemy and basically, I don't know, I guess you stand off. There is more to the combat than just the sword play. You have tools that you unlock as you go as well. To list a few tools, you have smoke bombs, which you can use for quick escapes or to assassinate foes in combat, or sticky bombs, which you can throw at an enemy to blow them up, or you have your poison darts, which you can shoot at enemies to kill them silently. You also have kunai blades that you can throw at enemies to deal some damage and stagger them in combat, and there are many other tools that become at your disposal as you unlock them while progressing through the main story and the side content. Tools can be incredibly useful, especially when you're overwhelmed by the sheer amount of enemies that you're faced with, and can also be incredibly useful when facing tricky enemies with a sturdy defense. The only time these tools cannot be used in combat are in duels, where you can use your stances and resolve and your ghost stance if you have it built up. You unfortunately can't use any tools here, and you can't use your archery either. The duels are perhaps the most challenging part of the combat, where you just have to rely on your sword and your skill, and are primarily there to make use of the in-depth combat and the challenges that you can overcome using it. It's also the part of the game where you'll find the heaviest emphasis on patience in combat, and these fights are probably some of the hardest in the game as well, often requiring you to make a mental note of your opponent's fight pattern and strategize accordingly, changing up your stances every so often to get a new edge. You'll probably find yourself dying in these duels quite a fair bit, but the game knows how to balance this out. Every time you reload after dying in a duel, you will come back with more resolve than you had when you started last attempt. Though on harder difficulties than normal, I don't know if this is a thing, I've heard that it's not. Eventually the game will offer you an out as well and say, do you want to come back later, which you can accept there, or you can change the difficulty down if you're really struggling. Fortunately in my playthrough, I never had to make use of either of these options, always being able to eventually overcome my foe. And we all know that I'm not the best at games, so I think it just goes to show that despite presenting quite an adequate challenge, this game is incredibly accessible. That being said, dying 50 times can get a little bit frustrating. It's also where I noticed a few minor nitpicks that I have with the combat. One being sometimes it doesn't feel like it's responding at all. You'll press the button to parry an attack at the right time, and it just won't do anything. The reason why it won't do anything is because somehow you've locked yourself into another animation which prevents you from parrying the attack that you can't block, which is partially why the combat is best enjoyed if you're patient with it, but I do feel like the game should allow you to cancel your animation at any point to respond to what's happening if you're fast enough. I also noticed sometimes that dodging does not actually dodge out of the way of the attack. Sometimes things that should in theory work don't. You'll dodge out of the way of an unblockable attack that you can parry, but somehow the enemy AI tracking still hits you even if you move in a way that makes that hit landing very unnatural looking and makes you think, well, that should have worked, it just didn't. Of course, the solution to this is when you see that blue light flash, to not try to dodge at all, but to instead just try to parry. But it can be a little bit irritating when a dodge does seem like a sensible move, but it just doesn't actually achieve the effect it perhaps should. Maybe I'm being silly here, and maybe I'm just not very good at the game. Of course that's possible, and it's true, to be fair. But I have spoken to other people who have played the game who say very similar things. So maybe to some that point may seem nonsensical, but not to everybody, I hope. I feel like I've made a big point out of something really minor there, but it is probably the only thing that I can actually criticise about these duels, because for the most part they're terrific. If I were to suggest one improvement to the combat on the whole, I think that it would be good if we could lock onto our opponent, because sometimes there'll be several enemies about and you might just wind up swinging at air because the game doesn't know which enemy you're actually trying to fight. This doesn't happen often, and the combat by no means is in need of a lock-on system, but I think it would help clean up those certain instances where the game can get a little bit confused. Moving on, I briefly mentioned it, but we also have archery in this game, allowing you to use your half bow and a longbow. The longbow is better for ranged attacks, but the draw speed is slower. The arrows do devastating damage, and the half bow allows for you to drop back and use it in combat if you need to, but deals less damage. You get different arrow types for each, such as flaming arrows for the half bow and exploding arrows for the longbow. Other tools on the archery wheel consist of the blowpipe, which allows you to shoot poison darts, which we've already mentioned, and throwables such as black powder bombs, wind chimes and firecrackers. But moving on, you also have stealth in this game, obviously. I would argue that the stealth in this game is passable, it works, it's fun to play, but it's very clearly aided by the fact that enemy AI can be dumb as fuck. You can openly slaughter one portion of a camp in combat, killing people with explosions and everything, only for another portion of the camp to not even notice that anything has happened, still going about their regular routines. The stealth does, however, feel good in assassinations and multi-assassinations, with really smooth and satisfying animations. I would argue that maybe there's not much aesthetic variety in those, but the stealth is functional, so I can't complain too much, nor do I really want to. You can also use tools in stealth, such as wind chimes and firecrackers, to create distractions, to slip past or to draw enemies into one spot and kill them all, and can use dense foliage, climbing and obstacles to avoid being detected. So in a lot of situations, both the combat approach and the stealth approach are viable, but of the two, I think I find myself favouring combat more often. But there are situations where stealth is a wiser move. As you progress through the game, you quickly amass technique points, which you can invest into various different combat and stealth skill trees. You can unlock new tools that I've already mentioned, increase damage of certain weapons, advance stances and attack patterns, improve stealth skills, increase standoff streaks and assassination chains, as well as so much more. You can invest a few points into simple exploration perks, which makes finding particularly useful things in the open world less of a chore. If you're not a completionist, you won't find yourself relying on those perks at all. However, it's a good way to make players work for the access as well, also making the game a little bit more bearable to those who want to platinum it. What I like about the leveling system in this is how quickly you amass technique points. It doesn't feel like it takes forever just to get one, like it does in a lot of other games. You unlock these points and invest them in perks pretty damn quickly, and you will have enough perks to get every single technique on each of the pages. Instead of having a linear numerical leveling system that means nothing when you think about it, instead you grow your legend to a new status, which increases your max health but otherwise really means nothing when you think about it too deeply, but at least it's not a random number that serves no purpose other than to give you a massive headache. On top of the leveling system, you get charms, which you can apply to charm slots to be extra effective in particular ways depending on the charms you choose to fit your playstyle. These can give you little bonuses in health, in damage, and other aspects such as parrying and so on and so forth, and can be incredibly useful. As you progress through the game, you unlock new slots and new charms pretty quickly, so if you're something of an experimental player, then there's plenty to mess with. Furthermore, you have upgrading and customization. Over the course of the game, you unlock headbands, helmets, masks and outfits. The outfits all have different values and become useful for different things. For example, some give massive increases to health, others help you with exploration. You can dye your outfits different colours as well, and you can also change the theme on your sword kit and also on your bows. You can upgrade your sword, your tanto, your bows, and your outfits at different specialist merchants found throughout the game. My favourite outfit has to be the one that you get for completing all the hot springs, because who doesn't want to run around Tsushima in their underpants? I am the ghost! Fear me! As you upgrade your armour, I think it looks cool at adding little bits and bobs here and there. I don't think there's a single armour set in this game that I dislike the look of, which is always great. You find the resources required to upgrade your gear as you go. Primarily this is supplies. By supplies I mean it just literally says supplies. The currency of Tsushima also appears to be flowers. Okay. You can also find iron and steel, though they're nowhere near as plentiful as supplies. I would personally love to know what supplies actually means, but I guess it's never really relevant. But what does matter is that the game has a well-balanced economy. Exploration and side content in Ghost of Tsushima is handled interestingly as well. You don't have a minimap or a compass or HUD assist of any sorts to help you navigate from one location to another. You can instead call a guiding wind to direct you towards a marked location or objective. I find it very convenient that the wind is always flowing in the direction that Jin needs to go, but I'll happily overlook that lack of realism just for the sake of not having HUD all over the screen at all times. Nature can also be somewhat useful in this game. For example, foxes will lead you to Inari shrines where you can honour the shrine and gain a point towards obtaining either a charm or a charm slot. It's pretty simple, but it happens a lot, and in my opinion there are simply far too many fox stems in this game. It's a neat little feature, but is it worth doing 49 times? Are you mad? No. Then you have yellow birds that can guide you to locations. This is a fun way to be done with the HUD and immerse you in the experience in a way that reduces the nonsense that's flying about your screen. I do find it funny how birds suddenly feel the need to be helpful, as the only positive experience I've had with a bird is one that shat on my shoulder. I suppose Japanese birds are just nicer. Even still, if I came across a pigeon in Bolton that said, "Hey, follow me," I'd know instantly that it's a trap. Of course, the world map highlights key locations with question marks, or when you get close to a location it marks it with a question mark, but it doesn't give you much guidance beyond that. The rest is in the world queues. I would argue that in the long term there isn't really enough variety in world queues to keep this exploration aspect interesting. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of side content to be engaging in, from the fox shrines to torii gates leading to parkour climbing, navigational pieces to shrines to acquire charms, haiku spots where you can post haikus and acquire a fancy new headband that you'll probably never use, but the customization option's cool. You can find pillars of honor where essentially you can acquire a new skin for your sword, light up lighthouses for some reason I guess, hardly the most riveting world activity ever, but it's there. Duels with Straw Hat Ronin, which plays into a mythic tale, more on those in a moment. Hot springs where Jin can reflect on certain aspects of his life. Sometimes it feeds you little bits of lore, sometimes Jin just talks about his favourite foods. This increases your maximum health every time you do one, but you also have to bear witness to some raw samurai arse. Bamboo strikes, which are a fun little finger twister in which you have to do a short quick time event in order to increase your maximum resolve. You can also liberate camps and towns that have been invaded by Mongol forces. When liberating these locations, you'll find that they suffer from box ticking exercise objectives, which bother me a lot. However, the gameplay sort of neutralizes that and makes it fun. But once I've killed every Mongol in a location, I don't then understand why I still have to free birds in cages and collect banners just because the game says so as part of the liberation of the camp. But liberating these objectives gives you the perfect opportunity to deal with a load of Mongols in one place. Whether you want to do that in combat or in stealth is completely up to you. There's plenty to be doing in the open world and it's fun in itself. However, when you see that bird flying overhead after a while of playing the game, you eventually know what's up and where you're going, and you know not to expect anything particularly fresh. The exception to that, of course, being side quests. There are many fun, memorable side quests in this game, the best of them being probably the character story arcs and the mythic tales. The mythic tales essentially send you on the hunt for legendary gear. There are 7 of them in total. In my opinion, these are the highest quality side quests in the game. There probably should be more. They're all unique and tell a different story and are told in different ways. One might require you to duel several Straw Hat Ronin. Another will ask you to liberate 6 specific locations in order to get the keys to acquire a specific armor set. Another may be about unlocking a pretty powerful ability, such as the Heavenly Strike or the Dance of Wrath. They all start pretty similar. You hear a rumor from a random NPC in the world, then you head to a specific location where you meet the same musician each time. There the game will tell you a beautifully animated little story, and from there on out it's effectively a treasure hunt of sorts. The prompts aren't too difficult to find, but don't expect the game to hold your hand too much in doing them. As I mentioned, beyond the mythic tales we have got the character arcs that you have for your allies in the main story, who have their own stories in the side content, which I've probably mentioned a couple of times already. Barring the odd moment that doesn't make too much sense, these are high quality character arcs that I really enjoyed playing. It gave me an attachment to Jin's allies, and it also made me feel kind of appreciative for having them around when Jin needed them, as Jin was there when they needed him. Some of these arcs are longer than others, but they're all 100% worth doing, and honestly, I think I wouldn't be able to do the main story without doing these, because they just feel a bit integral to that character development of the side characters. Standalone side quests that you encounter throughout the open world can be fun as well. Often they'll have a little story of their own to follow, and at least a handful of these are very interesting mini plots. I think if there are 2 things that let the side quests down quite a fair bit in this, sometimes you'll find a lack of actual cutscenes. These sort of cutscenes here, in my opinion, aren't cutscenes really. There's no real expression going on, there's nothing really unique about it besides from maybe the backdrop of it. It doesn't feel particularly intricate. Now, not every cutscene needs to be a full-on proper cutscene, but I don't think it would go amiss. And at times, Other side quests suffer from being a little bit underwhelming. I'm not even saying these quests are bad, I'm just saying that come the end some of them don't feel satisfying. I'm going to give an example here, don't worry. So there's a quest that takes you to a supposedly haunted wood. In this wood you will find several horrifying signs of some really serious foul play, such as decapitated corpses all over the place, and it just seems incredibly sinister in tone and so on. The game isn't fantasy to the point where I'd expect an actual spirit to be responsible for these deaths, but I was thinking maybe there's a deranged serial killer here or something like that. The atmosphere in this quest is perfect for that sort of story. But no, the revelation at the end is, it was just bandits. The same looking bandits that I've already killed 100 times over. And while the quest on the whole is fun, good and engaging, this reveal at the end is just underwhelming, to be honest. It might seem like a bit of a nitpick to some, but in my opinion this prevents a lot of quests in this game from being great. They're good, sure, but a lot of them aren't great. That is because while a lot of them are enjoyable to play, they're not really memorable. They don't feel unique. They all wind up having a similar outcome to other quests. And that's not because they don't start off strong. A lot of them do. They just fizz out. I will say this about a lot of the side content. Come the end, however, it does feel rewarding as you feel like you're progressing, both in technique points, which you get very quickly, and can invest them in techniques that will find a way to make your life easier when tackling the main story content. Nothing in this game is without purpose, really, though sometimes you'll have random encounters where you'll rescue somebody on the road, they'll give you something, and you'll just get a technique point, or progress towards one. Now, I find it really hard to believe that technique points are a physical thing within the game's lore, but okay. But my point is, irrespective of the sense that it may make, engaging in any activity brings its own reward. Even though the box-ticking objectives of liberating towns isn't the most exciting gameplay ever, at least you get to see the effect of liberating that location. Once it's done, people will return to it. There will be merchants here that you can trade with, stuff like that. So even though at times the side content in this game can get a little bit on the repetitive and predictable side, none of it is without some purpose. And there is plenty to be enjoyed here. As you explore the open world, you'll notice that graphically this game is absolutely gorgeous. The game isn't trying to look hyper-realistic, instead sporting an exaggerated visual style. The textures look good, the environments look good, the lighting looks good, the facial animations look good, and the environmental variety between different areas of the map also is pretty damn fantastic. For example, the south of the map looks different to the north being quite snowy, the south being quite warm. Which brings me to one of my absolute favourite parts of the game, the photo mode. The photo mode for the most part is rather bog standard, I'll admit. It is all it needs to be in many aspects, but what puts this photo mode above others in my opinion is the dynamic environments. When in photo mode Jin, any NPCs and enemies and animals will stop moving, however the environment keeps moving, which allows you to record and share environmental shots. In photo mode you can adjust the time of day, weather, lighting, exposure, depth of field, focus distance, filter particles, density of said particles, and the wind speed and direction of said particles in order to capture an atmospheric shot. On top of this you can remove Jin's helmet and mask, change his facial expression, add the Ghost of Tsushima logo, and even play parts of the game's soundtrack in the background, and it's honestly amazing. On top of this you can also add cinematic bars if you so wish to. Then you can hide the UI options and take a screenshot and upload it straight to Twitter from your PlayStation so people can get annoyed at the fact that you're having fun. In my opinion, this photo mode goes that little bit above and beyond what a photo mode in a game like this actually needs to be, which is why I love it so much. So I thought I'd share with you guys some of my favourite photos that I've taken in this game. If you want to see all of the screenshots that I've taken from this game, then be sure to head over to my Twitter, where I've literally pasted them all over the place. But in my opinion, nothing truly captures and highlights a game's beauty quite like a fully functional, lovely photo mode like this. And I surely spent more time than is healthy using it, so I'm really happy with that. It's always fun to throw in a creative feature like that for players to mess about with, because you get some wonderful shots. This truly is a stunning game with plenty of aesthetic to brag about, and I really don't know what else there is to say beyond that. On the technical front, this game is a little bit surprising, especially considering how the game looks and the fact that we're on the very dying breaths of this generation of consoles. The loading screen times in this game are surprisingly short. Sure, at times they aren't exactly lightning fast, but I can't say that you sit there for a solid minute looking at a screen. You look at a screen for a little while, maybe 10-15 seconds maximum, and then you're in. The game's engine is massively efficient, and surprisingly I haven't witnessed any pop-ins. However, I will say, when the game glitches, oh, it fucking glitches.
My lord, please, help me!
It's true, all games have bugs, all games have a bit of jank here and there. Ghost of Tsushima is no exception, and it's certainly not an example of a game that has too much jank and too many bugs. I did experience a few funny bugs in this game, but I'm pretty sure post-launch patches will resolve those issues if they haven't already. Moving on, people are probably expecting me to talk about how this game has taken a lot of inspiration from old samurai movies. Now, if I was qualified to talk about that subject, I probably would, but I'm not, so cool samurai shit, I guess. You do get the options to play the game in Japanese with English subtitles, and you also get the opportunity to play the game in black and white Japanese with English subtitles, which I guess takes after the old samurai movies in that sense, which is a call you get to make at the start of the game, and I guess that's cool if you care about it, but that's not something that I'm particularly fussed by. But having that option is always nice. I also see a lot of people comparing Ghost of Tsushima to Assassin's Creed, and while I see it in very minor ways, I also think that overall comparing Ghost of Tsushima to Assassin's Creed isn't entirely fair on Ghost. It's not like the older Assassin's Creed because it's not a historical sci-fi mystery, and it's not like the newer Assassin's Creed because it's not an open-world RPG. It's a historical action-adventure game that has stealth aspects and allows you to climb certain things, but it's not Assassin's Creed, is it? The game's not even trying to be Assassin's Creed. Hell, Assassin's Creed isn't trying to be Assassin's Creed these days. What I'm trying to say is Ghost of Tsushima is trying to tell its own story, it's its own game, and I don't think it's right to judge it in the shadow of a franchise that doesn't even have an identity of its own anymore. As a final point, in this game there are no microtransactions in sight. No asking you to pay extra for XP boosts or gear and progression locked behind paywalls. This game is a no bullshit, you've paid your money, you've got the full experience now. This is an authentic single player experience that doesn't tar itself by attempting to monetize features of the game, and that just goes to show, in my opinion, confidence on Sony's part, on Sucker Punch's part, with regards to how well their game will do, because they clearly loved making it, and I have nothing but masses of respect for that. In conclusion, there are many reasons to love Ghost of Tsushima, ranging from the great story, the excellent cast of characters, the awesome soundtrack, the incredible gameplay, the terrific photo mode, the beautiful visuals, and the fun, engaging and agreeable open world. It's a game of wonder, a beautiful tale, an absolutely unmissable experience. Sure, it might not offer something new to video games, it might not innovate too much, but it does present a very refined take on a genre that we know and love. Now, this is usually the part of the video where people ask for a number rating, but I won't be doing that. I used to give number ratings, then I realised that anything below a 7 out of 10 is just missable, and you're judging a game out of 10 based on criteria that you make up on the fly. And thus giving a number rating to a review when you think about it is actually just meaningless. Hopefully my words in this video are enough to convey the sheer quality of game that this is, and where a game like this could improve going forward. Ghost of Tsushima as a game isn't perfect, but it truly is something of beauty. I adore the experience that I've had with this game, and I know many others who love it as well. I felt satisfied with it, and I feel like it's a great high note to go out on for this generation of PlayStation exclusives, thus concluding my review for this fantastic game. Thank you all for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. That would be truly fantastic. Of course, be sure to go ahead and leave a comment and let me know what you think about this game. Keep it in mind to be respectful of others' opinions and there shouldn't be any problems. I would apologise for the length of this video, but there's a lot to talk about with this game, and if anything, it's not long enough, is it? But regardless, thank you all for watching, and with any luck, I'll see you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, goodbye.